I am very excited for today's conversation. I have with me a wonderful guest who is the Executive Director of Just Solutions, which is an incredible national organization working to advance climate justice through research programs, cross-sector partnership, and they're really doing incredibly innovative work on equitable and effective climate policies. Okay, I was gonna say, I'm also a huge fan of the Just Solutions podcast, so when the opportunity came to speak with you, I was very excited. So Aiko, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. So excited to be here with you today.
Likewise, could you introduce yourself a little bit? I know I just did, but pretend I didn't say that and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Happy to. I'm Aiko Schaefer. I'm the Executive Director of Just Solutions.
And for those who are not familiar with Just Solutions, what is Just Solutions and what is the work that the organization is doing?
So we are a new national climate organization that's really focused on working with communities disproportionately impacted by climate change as they bring their ideas into reality. So as you said, Kiana, we provide research and policy support and technical assistance on a number of issues, whatever it may be that communities are trying to tackle, what problems they're trying to tackle, and the different solutions that they're coming up with. And so we have an amazing team here at Just Solutions, many who grew up in environmental justice communities, but had the opportunity to go to school. A lot of them are first-generation college students that have gone on to have advanced degrees and law degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, and so really bring this wonderful blend of that lived experience with the traditional academic training that it takes to be able to do the work to provide the assistance that communities often need as they're moving their solutions forward.
I'm so impressed with how the work of Just Solutions, you managed to cover such a broad range of challenges and topics and opportunities for solutions within the climate and environmental justice space, and how the research and different programming you offer really goes into depth and offers just a broad variety of perspectives. And yeah, I think it's really, really thoughtfully done. So excited to dive more into some of that research and programming. But before we do that, I would love to hear a little bit more about your personal journey in the environmental space, in that, like, what inspired you and called you to be in this work? And perhaps what are some professional highlights that led you to this role?
Well, I've had the privilege of working on a number of issues across the country, a lot of extraordinary leaders and people and thinkers in the space of progressive issues. Most of my background is in running state and national legislative campaigns, namely public policy campaigns, but also partisan campaigns. And so I spent a lot of time in my career doing that, learning the trade, so to speak. Sometime around 2008, I decided to take a break from all of that. I think I was really, disillusioned with where we were going on the left. It was also an important time for me to spend time with my children. And so I took the opportunity to go teach at the University of Washington in Seattle, which gave me this opportunity to study and read, but also reflect on my life and my career. And really, at that point, didn't know much of what I wanted to do. It was really around 2014 and really full-time in 2016 that I decided to dive into working on climate justice issues. And the reason is because I felt that there was this important opportunity, not only just to obviously, save the planet and save ourselves in this moment, but really for me, it's the strategy that I find the most interesting, that I felt like there was a real opportunity to build the broad movement that we needed to have the impact and political force that it takes to create the change. And so it's just been extraordinary to be part of the advancement, to sort of witness the advancement of policy design, policy leadership around climate justice issues. And so it's just been such an honor to be able to be in this space and to be working with so many community groups on the ground and so many inspiring campaigns, and to see their ideas come to reality.
That's wonderful. And I think it is an exciting time for climate policy in the US, particularly in the last few years. And we'll see, how that continues to evolve. Obviously, a lot of shifts politically that keep us on our toes, but there's been so much progress made, and I think there's so much more national attention on environmental justice and climate justice. So definitely I think an exciting time, and it's always wonderful to see how many people are so deeply passionate and committed to this work, because it ultimately is, I think, about like community and caring about each other,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So, can you share some of Just Solutions' guiding principles? And I know also the work you do is rooted in like a feminist framework, and how you use those guiding principles and intersectional approach to inform all the different areas of expertise you're working in?
Yeah, definitely. So, Just Solutions as an organization, we work in service to, so to speak, of community, right? So they really are the moral compass, I would argue, the lead, the place where the best ideas come from, where the leadership really should be. And so fundamental to our approach is honoring and acknowledging that. So for us, we believe that the best and brightest ideas are coming from community. They're working intersectionally. They're thinking about how their communities are being impacted, what the solutions could be in really creative and interesting ways. We also believe that the people that are disproportionately impacted by climate change should lead the movement, that the people who directly are impacted by and stand to benefit and should benefit from climate solutions are those communities. And so that really drives our focus and really our approach. As a feminist centered organization, we are a BIPOC woman-led organization, which I think is really unusual in the national climate space. Our board is also majority BIPOC. And so, the environmental justice movement and the philosophies of the movement are really grounded in the strength and importance of Mother Nature. And so for us, thinking about, and when we talk about more about the solutions and the work out there's really the centering of recognizing that Mother Earth is just an important part of our very existence, for her ability to be strong and to be healed, to be able to honor the role that she plays in the way in which she is taking care of us as beings, and the importance of really centering that work. And so for us, the feminist and orientation is both in an operational, practical way and how we run our organization, how it's led. But I think fundamentally, it really is about thinking about the planet we live on more as a living, nurturing, supportive sort of element to our existence, which I think is antithetical, candidly, to where the mainstream environmental movement, climate movement is, which is almost in more of a sort of controlling and dominating nature, and of course, extracting from nature. And so for us, it's really important for us to center that thinking. And I think that is reflective of the long-term orientation of the environmental justice movement.
That's really wonderful to hear. And I think you make an important point, particularly in policy spaces. I wouldn't, and policy and climate tech and energy, that feminist framework, I think, is often not there, even though it's grounded, and the connection to Mother Earth. I think of oftentimes the movement around ecofeminism seems almost like an offshoot, right? And it doesn't have necessarily kind of full integration into mainstream environmental work, particularly in the policy space. So it's really great to hear how you're integrating that with work that is both in the culture of your organization and the fact that your work is so policy centered and you have that approach and that framework. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so I'd love to dig into some of the research and programming that you're working on, and I know there's a lot. So yeah, let's just start. And so you have a recent report, Comprehensive Building Blocks for a Regenerative and Just Policy, just 100% policy, that's working to help frontline organizations develop local policies around environmental justice. And as you just mentioned, around needing local communities to lead this work in procedural justice when it comes to policymaking. Can you share a little bit about what some of the takeaways or insights from that report are?
Yeah, so that report was really a foundational document that we created as we were becoming Just Solutions. So that report actually came out in 2021, and we were launched as Just Solutions in early 2021. And really that process and that work, I think, informed our creation as an organization. So back then, it wasn't that long ago, but we developed it in a time period in which the idea of 100% was really new to the policy space. This idea that we could, fundamentally move away from a reliance on fossil fuels, and how would we get there? And so there was a lot of discussion about, could we do that? How would we do that? And so that, that's a big undertaking to figure out, well, what does that really mean? And I think that the groups that tended to lead that work nationally were national traditional green organizations. And so given their orientation and their work, equity was not often centered. So we felt like it was important for us to really be able to, sort of reframe or reclaim that conversation around 100%, which was in many communities a very important policy strategy or approach. So building that document really was this opportunity for us to bring the brightest minds working on policy and environmental justice across the country together for 2 days, and really sat together and said, okay, if we are going to fully move away from a reliance on fossil fuels, what would it take? What does it really mean? What's the framework? What's the context that we want to be able to put forward, and what are specific models that are out there that can get us there? And so we spent that time really compiling that document, which I think in many regards has become this kind of broader roadmap for people to look through it, and depending upon what your area of emphasis might be, to really see again, like how to think about the issue, what are the models that are out there, and to begin to drive this conversation and hopefully move that conversation in which equity and justice are more braided within the approach than sort of siloed and usually marginalized to one side of the work. And so doing that work, I think, was so important to us thinking about Just Solutions in its creation, because what we realized is that there was a real hunger for that. There was a hunger to elevate collectively the solutions that were being advanced and the wins that communities were having around policy design and approach, but also to give people a place where they could replicate models and find solutions that were happening in other places that maybe they could replicate in their own state or community, and ultimately to drive kind of that collective vision of having equity and justice at the center. And I think finally, which was sort of the extra part, was to be able to lift up BIPOC policy experts who are, very smart and capable and can, talk about broadly climate policy, and to be able to bring that leadership to bear. I think so much of the work, there's an impression or understanding that the people that are the experts around climate policy are not people who look like you and me, right? And so I think that was another element, was to be able to bring that to bear in what is a very complex sort of question of how we fundamentally move away from fossil fuel dependency and reliance.
You can write all the most amazing, groundbreaking reports that are, full of excellent policy and strategic recommendations, but at the end of the day, the gap between reports to implementation can sometimes be bigger than we want it to, right? Because you then need to make sure that those insights are seen and acted upon by those who they need to be. So I guess I know you, taking that fabulous work and research that you do, how do you then take those recommendations and help see them implemented and actually have real impact on local policies?
Yeah, that is the big question, the how, right? I think the challenges first that we have is that, communities are, impacted by just an extraordinary number of problems. And we would argue that was intentional, right? And when you look at the climate and environmental sort of arena, communities that are BIPOC, communities that are lower income, right, are shouldering so much of our waste, so much of our extraction, right, so much of the impacts of climate. And so when you meet the community organizations, they are just absolutely extraordinary, but they are covering a lot of issues and they are very, very under-resourced, right? They are not being funded at remotely the scale that we would see large traditional environmental organizations. So the fundamental challenge is that, in order for us to sort of have that expertise involved in all the decisions that impact their lives, right, is how do we begin to resource them? And I think for us, fundamentally, that is the message that we all need to get out, which is we have to invest in communities. We have to invest in these community organizations that play such a fundamental role to our ability to broadly save the planet, right? Not just those communities, but we would argue, all of us in the work that has to happen. And so, for us, we are able to provide what I think of as additional staffing for those organizations. So some of those organizations don't have a policy director or policy staff. They don't have a research staff or researchers. And sometimes they need that, right? They need someone to sort of say, we have this concept and this idea, but we're not quite sure yet what that language might look like in a bill, what it would look like in policy, right? Or we think we have this idea, we want to kind of understand the problem a little bit more and to see whether or not our solution has impact. So we can staff them on that. And then as you pointed out, it's not just the passing of the policy, then it's the implementation. And so, there's rulemaking, there's a complexity of working with agencies to interpret policy to be able to come up with the rules that the program or policy will sort of land the way that we intended. And then finally, the enforcement, right? So how do you make sure? And so for us, we haven't quite got to the enforcement level. I think we are learning a lot about the sort of administrative advocacy, which is harder to engage in, right? Because it tends to work well with, a legal team and folks who sort of can get in that space. And so the roles that we play really are as active as communities want us to be. And so the calls that we get across the country really vary in terms of what people want, from models to helping with language to administrative advocacy to thinking about enforcement, and also, of course, replication. So we are super young and new. I think we've done some of those things. We're trying to, meet the need. But again, fundamentally is I think the implementation part to really kind of bring this all to fruition is the ability by which communities have the capacity to do the work. And that is changing. I mean, we would argue not as much as we need, but I think there is that growing recognition because of the extraordinary advocacy of the communities on the ground, really making that clear, like, hey, you need to give us resources. We need to have a bigger role in solving the climate crisis.
Absolutely. And it's very true that so many phenomenal environmental justice organizations are really not equipped with the level of resources that they need in different capacities to be able to have the full impact of implementing all the different solutions that are necessary. So it's really great to see organizations such as Just Solutions and other coalitions and just different structures to sort of build capacity and support between different leaders within the environmental justice space. So even though, as you're saying, it's a younger organization, you've already accomplished a lot. So I'd love to talk about one of the projects you have, the Hydrogen Environmental Justice Framework, which I've really been enjoying all the content you've released for that. I also really liked the podcast episode you did on green hydrogen. And I think, we have not that much time in terms of the energy transition and reducing emissions. And technologies such as carbon capture and hydrogen have often been thought of as false solutions by environmental justice communities. I mean, I don't think I would maybe go as far as using the word false solutions. I think the answer is it's extremely complex, and like that can be the case. But Yeah, hydrogen, super interesting topic, very complex. I've just really enjoyed kind of the level of detail, the framework and the webinar and then the episodes you've released around this. So could you just share a bit about the work that Just Solutions is doing around green hydrogen and how we can think about what the uses of hydrogen are potentially in a more equitable way?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm so glad that you've been checking it out and find it useful because it is a very complex topic. And I encourage your listeners to really look at our resources that are online and our webpage around it. I'm definitely not the technical expert on hydrogen energy, but I think, fundamentally, as a nation, I think as a globe, we've been, very fascinated with technology. I'm very much, I think in this place and in this moment, as we think about how we address climate change, I think technology and the hope that there is or that people have around technology is really saving the day is really has been supercharged because of the recent federal investments. And so hydrogen energy by and large is an untested technology. We're not really sure how it will work. When you look at the hydrogen investments across the nation, we're actually not entirely clear what the different technologies are. And so there was just a lot to learn, and community groups were very concerned about what is this thing and what does it mean for my community and how can I engage in it? And so we brought together environmental justice organizations from the regions where the hydrogen hubs were likely to be located and coupled them with our policy team and external technical experts, and both from Stanford University and the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research to really work together as a team. And so the technical experts, these are scientists, really helped community groups to understand, well, what is this technology? What are the implications? How does it function? What's the rainbow of colors of hydrogen? How's gray and green different? And the whole, kind of details of it to the best of their knowledge. They were able to put together technical papers, such as including hydrogen energy's implications for water resources. So again, encourage everyone to check that out on our website. And then through that work and our policy stuff, of course, leaning in around what are the policy implications, what decisions were made federally, where's the money going, how does implementation roll out around hydrogen hubs. And so through that work, in addition to the technical research papers that are there, the EJ groups decided and worked together to create an EJ framework. So the framework really helps to guide community advocates to think about or to have something to look at as they're evaluating the implications of hydrogen energy in their communities and what standards they think are important for it to meet the threshold of being environmentally just. And so it's just been a great resource. It's important now because the hydrogen hubs are rolling out nationally. So we've heard about the framework being used by state leaders and state sort of government folks. We've seen it be used by more community-based organizations across the country as they're trying to engage with industry and to understand what the technology is and what the implications are, and their advocacy, right, to have the hubs, work in a way that is beneficial and safe for their communities. And so it's an example of the kind of work that we do in that, yes, it's a very technical issue, but can we, work with folks on the ground to really understand how to bring the information in an accessible way and provide real tools for them to be able to advocate and inform different technological investments. And so it's just been really great to see. It was very impressive effort. At this point, we are looking to provide ongoing technical assistance to some of the locations and to be able to convene some of the participants to continue as this rolls out, as we begin to understand more and more about, what is happening, what these technologies are, and what groups are learning in their communities.
I was really struck by, I believe it was in the webinar you did, how communities were facing just an absolute lack of transparency around hydrogen hubs and lack of access to information to be able to even make informed decisions to engage. And so once again, it's just excellent that you're making this information accessible and available, and providing that technical assistance to communities, because it's so needed, right? There's just these gaps often around technological innovation where communities are not brought into the process early enough and need to be informed and have that information to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't know much about the technologies because part of the argument is these are, I forget what the term is, but sort of like they're trade secrets among the different corporations. However, this is $7 billion of taxpayer dollars, your money, my money, the community members' money. So that we're investing in this, like I said, a technology that is unproven. And so I think that there is this extraordinary leap of faith that we've taken in the industry. And I think the transparency should be required as a part of that. So we continue to have challenges with transparency. And I think that's the case across the board. I mean, when you look at the recent federal investments in climate solutions, just an extraordinary amount of the money is toward investing in technologies through direct investments, tax credits, those sorts of things. And so there's a lot for us to learn. There's a lot for us to track. There's a lot for us to engage in. And so part of our role is to sort of help with that and to give people the tools they need to feel like they can be informed advocates.
I listened to your season 2, I think, premiere episode with Denise Fairchild, who's incredible. And I just thought she was talking a lot about kind of the limitations of the faith in technology and sort of just the cultural the culture we live in that has allowed this level of extraction, and of course how to not potentially replicate that in a new age of technology. Basically, it's a great conversation. I would recommend everyone go listen.
Highly recommend it. Denise is amazing, and she talks about so many important things. I think that with this sort of investment in technologies and this feeling that we could just have some invention come out of Silicon Valley that will suddenly allow us to lead and live our existing lives the way that we currently are as people in the U.S. in particular, overall, I think is a false notion, right? We've sort of gotten away from these fundamental conversations around conservation and lifestyle, and also, just shutting down polluters. So I think when you look at carbon capture, right, the idea is and again, I'm not the policy technical person, which will become evident when I say this, which is carbon capture, right? Just getting all the bad stuff and putting it, into the ground and having it disappear, right? Which is the oldest trick in the book when anyone, when you're a kid and your mom asks you to clean up your room and you take all of your things and you shove it under your bed or in a closet. I feel like it's that sort of same mentality. The pollution is still there and it's going to have an impact in some way. And so I think and Denise talks a lot about, getting back to those basics, right? We have to be able to look at ourselves, especially as the U.S. in terms of our habits and our behaviors, which, transcends and sort of leads the world in terms of what people aspire for. And so I think there's this mentality where we think we're saving the planet. If I drive my Tesla, even if I own 12 Teslas, I'm still saving the planet. And if I own 4 houses and they're all energy efficient, I'm still, the better actor. And I think what she's getting at more is around those issues of we need to kind of get regrounded in the basics, because even any of these technologies have elements of extraction and waste, whether that's solar and wind, right? There are materials that we are creating that need to be dealt with. And some of them, have just significant implications on communities and on the planet.
Absolutely. I always say every technology has a shadow. And of course, even clean energy is often dependent on the mining industry and a lot of ethically problematic things within the supply chain. There's no perfect solution. That said, considering the level of what we're facing from the unfettered burning of fossil fuels, I think some of these technologies, even though they do have shadows and environmental justice challenges, which we need to address and improve on, they still are offering us a better path forward than the current trajectory we're on without those changes. So I think it's, it's complex. And I do have a lot of optimism and hope all mixed together in in all the climate emotions. And I think on this show, I like to talk about joy and justice. And I think what I love about also your show and Just Solutions is you're really focusing on the fact that we do have solutions, even if they're really complicated. So I'd love to know kind of, okay, I have a bunch of questions I wanted to ask you about this. So
okay. Sure.
I'll just jump into it now.
I'll do short answers so you can get through whatever ones you want to.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with, what is giving you hope and optimism about a more equitable and just climate and energy future?
Yeah, I think I have the same joy as you do. And it really is about the communities that are really coming up with extraordinary solutions. I think that they have been so historically damaged, that there's this, there's this resiliency, right? There's this recognition that no one, that they feel that no one's coming to save them. And so they have been really coming together and figuring out what their community really needs and doing it in with such doggedness, with such creativity, with such efficiency, that there's so much to learn there. I think there's so much for us to figure out from their experience, and that if we actually invested in them, both financially, but also in terms of their leadership in the movement, I think we would, be able to solve this problem in ways that we haven't yet imagined. And that gives me a lot of hope. And, much like you having a podcast and having the chance to learn from them and hear them and elevate them into this space, although most of them don't need help from me elevating them. They're already recognized leaders and doing the work that has to happen in all sorts of important ways. But it just gives me such joy. And so when I talk to people who are really depressed about climate change, really down about, the demise of our planet, I remind them that, inspiration is all around us, and we just have to see it and support it. And I think that we've got to get out of this place of feeling like the condition is so dire that there's nothing we can do, and that our actions don't matter, to recognize that there are extraordinary people out there that are sticking with it because they're dying now. That's the difference, is the climate movement talks about concern about a planet for our grandchildren, our children in the future. The communities that are leading are dying today. Their lifespans are shorter, the asthma rates are higher, the lack of clean air and water is more significant and urgent and immediate. So they've been forced to figure out how to survive. And so I think there's much for us to learn. And at a minimum, they are a picture into our future, both the good and bad, right, of what we might be facing because of climate change and our reliance on fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry.
And that's why also I think the impact of storytelling is so important, to share these stories and have the understanding of what is happening here and now, and not just in the future and the circumstances that people and communities are facing. You mentioned being inspired by resiliency of communities. I know Just Solutions has research and I believe a series focused on resilience, climate resiliency, and its connection to lots of other issues. Could you share a little bit about that and some highlights from it?
Yeah, definitely. And again, encourage people to go to our website. It's a report recently released by our team, Zuli Juarez and Jennifer Moon, called The Perfect Storm. And it really recognizes that, communities that are being impacted by climate change, which is a pretty significant challenge, are the same communities that have a history of extraction and exploitation, that the sort of the culmination of all of these historic harms, the very intentional policy decisions that have been made, put these communities at higher risk as we look at the impacts of climate change. And so it really is the first attempt to look at climate disasters, to kind of understand the conditions that communities are in, again, because of historic decisions, lack of investments, lack of services. And so what does that mean for communities, and what are they experiencing? And then again, because we're Just Solutions, is really looking at case studies, some very specific solutions that communities have been putting forward that have had impact. And so it gives you that overarching view, but leaves you with some specific things that could be done to address climate disasters.
That's fantastic. And I appreciate how intersectional it is that you're looking at sort of economic impact, health impact, just across the board. How can we think about how resiliency connects to all these pre-existing structural issues due to decades of policy? And it's needed work to think about how we can shift and improve resiliency moving forward. Yeah. Are there any other kind of programs, reports, any work that the organization has done that you feel have been really foundational that you'd love to highlight?
Gosh, so many. I think our Leading with Race work. So we have been working very closely to understand the implications of the Supreme Court's decision around affirmative action and implications around climate policy and climate investments and centering race in the climate work. So there is a web page that we have that has great resources for people to understand in the near term, sort of how they can work within that dynamic and to better understand the implications of the decision that was made. So when you think about your listeners who work in nonprofit organizations, philanthropy, even government, we're all impacted by the dismantling of affirmative action by the Supreme Court. And so wanted to be able to give people resources around what that meant. And then again, what are some solutions that they could put in place to really continue to advance racial justice in the environmental and climate space.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really great to hear you have those resources. So essentially this ruling has the potential to take, I'm sure, many fields, but in this particular case, we're talking about climate and the environmental movement, a field that's already known to be not particularly diverse, and sort of compound that issue, right? Because then there's less educational opportunities for students of color that have already been historically excluded from the educational system.
Definitely that. And then also it means that we can't use race as a factor when we design policy. So in Washington State, where I lived most of my life, and in California, right, we've in I think the early 2000s, voters decided to get rid of affirmative action. And so what it means is that when you're designing climate policy, for example, you can't include race as an indicator, as a benefactor, as a focus of any policy. And so if we're trying to do environmental justice, we have to think about, well, how do we get at communities that we know are disproportionately impacted because they're Black and brown? How do you move benefits, and how do you understand their condition if you can't use race in your work? And so there have been work to think about proxy variables, so to speak, but they are not the same. They don't quite capture what we're needing to do. And so, yeah, the affirmative action decision is definitely about educational access, but more broadly, it means that race cannot be used as an aspect of it. It means, for example, women and minority-owned businesses can't do that, right? So all of those elements that really have advanced, and really, repaired, advanced, made up for, public policy damage and decisions to Black and brown communities, were beginning to be addressed under affirmative action. And with the dismantling of that program, it means, yes, anything in terms of public policy broadly, not just around education, but broadly eliminates race as a as an aspect of policy design approach and benefits.
Yeah, that's a tremendous impact. I've worked with several minority women-owned businesses in the clean energy space, and even being like MWB certified, or there's so much challenge for those small businesses to even get the same opportunities, right? That's huge.
Exactly. And under this decision, our understanding is that you can't have those programs anymore. You can't intentionally guide resources or benefits to, BIPOC women-owned industries.
Well, hopefully, I'm like,
if you want to do a show on that, happy to have some of our staff come on and talk about it.
Thank you. I might take you up on that.
Yeah, it's pretty extreme. Yeah. I don't know if we understood the implications of the decision, but it's very far-reaching. It's very problematic.
And yeah, there's so much more we could say. For time's sake, though, I'm going to move us into some closing thoughts, and also try to end on a slightly more optimistic note. But as I've mentioned, you are also a podcast host of the Just Solutions podcast, which I recommend that everyone go and check out. It's a phenomenal show. It's inspired me. I know in doing my show, I get so much joy and learn so much from having different guests, and being able to then share those moments with the broader community, I think is a wonderful experience. So I'm just curious to hear if you've had any sort of meaningful or impactful learning moments, whether it's through the podcast or through your role more broadly, where you've had a moment of really just feeling the impact of your work.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love having the podcast. As the executive director of Just Solutions, so much of my time is as an administrator, fundraising, working with the board, working with staff, that I often don't get to do the fun stuff. I don't get to really learn about the issues. So the podcast selfishly gives me the opportunity to engage with so many amazing, smart, impactful people. I think that every episode to me is just so great, and I feel so privileged to be part of a conversation with everybody who's been on our show. I think my favorite moments have been, having guests who are climate experts, who are in particular BIPOC women, Black women, because the climate movement has invested so much in this conversation of whether or not climate change is real, that so much of, that we think often as the experts of climate change or climate solutions as being white male scientists. And so to me, the opportunity to really find people who are out there who don't look the part, and they're able to really go toe to toe on climate technical information, research, policy, to me is my favorite. And so to be able to, be with them and to hear their minds, or to understand their minds, to witness their minds in action is just really great. And to be able to be part of putting them out there as leaders in the movement has just really been, like I said, a real privilege.
That's so wonderful to hear. And I'm very much envisioning a climate and energy future grounded in more equitable policy and led by so many incredible climate and environmental experts who are women of color. So thank you so much for the work you're doing at Just Solutions and the work you're doing to elevate both these solutions and experts and leaders. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you, Aiko.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to continue to be a follower, to kind of see who you have next on your show. I really appreciate this opportunity for us to be together and to support one another, and can't wait to have you on my show. We'll talk some more.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.